Elijah had grown used to the silence. Out here, in the Wyoming wilderness miles from the nearest town, silence wasn't empty, it was alive. It hummed in the creak of pine trees, swaying against the wind, in the distant call of an eagle, in the rhythm of his axe splitting logs. It was a sound he trusted. People, on the other hand, were unpredictable. For 3 years, Elijah had lived alone in his cabin, a sturdy wooden structure he built with his own hands after leaving behind a world that didn't seem to want him anymore. The tall, broad-shouldered man had a face weathered by harsh winters and eyes that carried a quiet storm. He hunted chopped wood and kept his radio for emergencies only. Loneliness had settled on him like a second skin, and he wore it without complaint. But that night, something broke the silence. It was just after sunset, the woods dim with the last traces of orange light. Elijah was returning from checking his traps along a ridge when he heard it, a faint, desperate sound carried by the wind. He stopped mid-step, every muscle tightening. It wasn't an animal. No wolf or bear cried like that. A voice, a woman's voice. He adjusted his pack and followed the sound, moving fast down the slope. The snow crunched under his boots as he navigated through thick underbrush until he came to a steep embankment. Below, in a shallow ravine, lay a mangled SUV. Its front end was crushed against a fallen tree, smoke curling from the hood. "Hello!" Elijah called out, his deep voice echoing. A weak reply came from inside the wreckage. "Help, please!" He scrambled down, ignoring the branches scraping his arms. Through the shattered window, he saw her, a young woman with long, dark hair plastered to her face with blood. Her skin was pale, her breaths shallow, but her eyes dark and defiant, locked on his. "Don't leave me here," she whispered. "I won't," Elijah said firmly. Bracing himself, he tore open the door with a grunt, wincing as the metal screamed in protest. Carefully, he reached in and gathered her in his arms. She was light, frighteningly so, and her body trembled against his chest. As he carried her up the slope, the storm clouds overhead began to gather, and a cold wind bit at his face. He didn't know who she was or how she'd ended up in his woods. But one thing was certain, Elijah wasn't about to let her die out here. Elijah pushed the cabin door open with his shoulder, careful not to jostle the fragile woman in his arms. The storm outside howled, flinging snow like shards of glass against the wooden walls, but inside it was warm. The air scented faintly of pine and burning logs. He laid her gently on the cot near the fire, her head lolling to the side, lips pale and cracked. Droplets of melted snow slid down his flannel shirt as he crouched beside her, scanning her injuries in the dim firelight. Her jeans were torn and soaked, and bruises bloomed across her arms like ink stains. But what worried him most was her legs. They hadn't moved once since he pulled her from the wreck. She stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse, fragile as thin ice. "My cabin," Elijah said softly. "Storm's too heavy to get you to town tonight. I'll call for help at first light." Panic flashed in her eyes. Her hands gripped the wool blanket weakly. "My legs. I can't feel them." Elijah's chest tightened. He had seen men lose the use of their legs before. Logging accidents crush spines. "You might be in shock," he said gently, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "Don't try to move. You need rest." Her breathing quickened, her dark eyes glassy with fear. I can't stay here. You don't know me. Easy," Elijah interrupted, his deep voice calm but firm. "You're safe. I'm Elijah. What's your name?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Ayasha." "Ayasha," he repeated softly, committing it to memory. "I'm going to take care of you. I promise." He stoked the fire higher, the orange glow licking across the walls as he warmed a pot of broth. Ayasha drifted in and out of sleep, mumbling things he couldn't make out. Fragments of her life, maybe, or prayers to a god she wasn't sure was listening. Elijah worked silently, adjusting her position so she wouldn't get bed sores, checking her pulse every so often. The storm raged on through the night, isolating them completely. Elijah sat near the cot, listening to her shallow breathing and the crackle of burning logs. He didn't know why fate had dropped this woman into his lonely world, but one thing had already become clear. Ayasha wasn't just fighting to heal her body. She was fighting to survive in more ways than one. When the storm finally broke 3 days later, Elijah strapped on his boots and prepared the old snowmobile for a treacherous trip to town. He'd kept Ayasha warm and fed on thin soups and herbal tea, but he knew she needed real medical care. As they rode through the frozen wilderness, Ayasha leaned against his chest, silent but wide-eyed. The once defiant fire in her gaze had dimmed, replaced by something heavier, a quiet acceptance of her broken body. At the hospital in Riverton, the news came like a hammer blow. Spinal trauma. Surgery would stabilize her back, but her ability to walk again was uncertain. Ayasha stared blankly at the doctor, her hands clenched in her lap. "So, I'm trapped," she whispered. The words sliced through Elijah's chest like the wind outside. She had no family to call. No one came to visit her during her week in recovery. When Elijah offered to bring her back to his cabin until she figured things out, she stared at him, suspicious at first. "Why are you helping me?" she asked flatly. Elijah shrugged. "Because someone has to." Back at the cabin, he built a ramp for her wheelchair using old planks from his shed. He adjusted the furniture so she could move freely, crafting a makeshift handrail in the small bathroom. Each morning, he helped her with physical therapy exercises the nurse had scribbled on a sheet of paper. Ayasha resisted at first, frustrated by her trembling arms and unresponsive legs. "What's the point?" she cried one afternoon, throwing a rolled-up blanket across the room. "I'll never walk again." Elijah knelt in front of her, his large hands gripping hers gently. "You don't know that," he said, his voice steady as the pines outside. "And even if you don't, you're still here. That's what matters." For a long moment, Ayasha looked at him, tears brimming in her eyes. Then she nodded faintly, the tiniest crack in her wall of despair. That night, as Elijah sat by the fire whittling a piece of wood into a crude carving, he glanced at her and realized something strange. The cabin no longer felt silent, not in the way it used to. It was as if her presence had woken something in him that had been asleep for years. Spring arrived quietly in the Wyoming wilderness, melting the snow and replacing the stark white landscape with tender shoots of green. The air felt softer now, carrying the earthy scent of thawing soil and pine needles. Ayasha sat near the cabin window, her sketchpad balanced on her lap, charcoal staining her fingertips as she brought to life the image of a wolf standing tall against a crescent moon. Her hands, though weak, still held a steady grace. Elijah watched her from across the room, his broad frame leaning against the kitchen counter. He had always found comfort in solitude, but now it felt different, like his quiet world had been filled with color again. Every morning, he helped Ayasha transfer from her cot to the wheelchair. Every afternoon, he supported her as she practiced bearing weight on her legs, even if her knees buckled after seconds. "Just one more try," he'd urged gently, his large hands gripping her elbows like anchors. One evening, as the sky glowed amber, Elijah guided her outside onto the porch. The ramp he'd built creaked slightly under her chair. Ayasha inhaled deeply, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her dark eyes sweeping over the forest. "You haven't seen the best part yet," Elijah said. He crouched beside her and pointed toward a clearing where a mother deer and her fawn stepped carefully from the trees. Ayasha's breath caught. She reached for her sketchpad instinctively, but Elijah stopped her gently. "You don't need to draw it. Just watch." Silence settled between them. Not the heavy, lonely silence Elijah had known before, but something softer, warmer. Later that night, while helping her with her therapy stretches, Ayasha looked at him suddenly. "You're teaching me to walk again," she murmured. Elijah met her gaze, his heart thudding. "And you're teaching me how to live again." For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the forest hummed with life, owls calling, leaves rustling, and for the first time in years, Elijah felt a heartbeat in the cabin that wasn't just his own. The warmth of spring couldn't keep the past from finding them. One morning, a sleek black SUV crunched up Elijah's dirt road. startling Ayasha as she practiced shifting her weight with her crutches. She froze when the doors opened and two well-dressed strangers stepped out, a man and woman with sharp features and cold eyes. "Ayasha," the man called, his voice tight. "It's your brother." Elijah stood protectively nearby as Ayasha gripped the crutches tighter. She hadn't spoken of family often, but when she did, there had been bitterness in her voice. The siblings embraced stiffly, and her brother's first words cut deep. "You shouldn't be here. You need doctors, proper care, not some hermit's cabin in the woods." Ayasha's lips trembled. "I've had more care here than I ever got from you." Her brother's gaze flicked to Elijah, filled with judgment. "You think this man can give you what you need? He's not your world. We are." That night, Elijah sat on the porch, staring into the darkness. "If you want to go with them, Ayasha, I'd understand," he said softly when she wheeled outside. She shook her head. "They're not my home. Not anymore." Her eyes softened. "You are." The days grew longer, and with each passing week, Ayasha grew stronger. Elijah crafted wooden parallel bars in the yard, and every morning they worked together. Her hands gripped the rails, arms trembling as she forced her legs to obey. One step, then two. Then she collapsed into Elijah's arms, laughing and crying all at once. "You did it," he murmured, holding her tight. "I didn't do it alone," she whispered back. That evening, they celebrated with a simple meal under the stars. Ayasha sketched in her notebook by lantern light, while Elijah carved a delicate wolf figurine from cedar. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, a question, an answer, and a promise. "You taught me how to walk again," she said softly, tears catching at her lashes. "And you taught me how to feel alive again," Elijah replied. His hand brushed hers, hesitant at first, then firm. Years later, the cabin no longer felt like Elijah's solitary refuge. It had become their home. Ayasha's paintings lined the walls, wolves, spirits, wild rivers, while Elijah's carvings sat proudly on the shelves. Together, they had built something stronger than wood and nails. Their wedding was small, held in a meadow near the river. Lakota elders blessed their union as Ayasha, leaning on Elijah's arm, took careful, deliberate steps down the aisle. Each one felt like a triumph. Elijah's eyes never left hers, his rugged face softened with emotion. As they exchanged vows, Ayasha whispered, "You carried me when I couldn't walk. Now we walk into life together." And in that quiet corner of the woods, where two broken souls had once found each other, love took root and bloomed stronger than the tallest pine.